G'day and welcome back. Talk of the town for another week. The Port Adelaide champion, Warren Tredrea. Hello to you.
Hello, Mr. Costello. How are you?
Mate, never a dull day in footy, and hasn't it been a week? Sammy McClure, the chief football reporter for the Nine Network. G'day.
Sebastian, Warren, looking forward to this one. We're starting to get closer to footy.
Yeah,
Can you smell it? Can you smell it? Forget about September grass. I want June mud. I just want to smell the mud.
Tredders, I don't care if it's in front of anyone. I don't care if there's no staff in the grounds at all. We can hear the players on the TV. As long as we're getting footy, I think it will just bring some sanity back to some of our lives.
Hubs, Sam. Are they happening? What form are they happening? Tell us the latest.
I mean, I feel like we're talking about a situation like 6 weeks ago in that it's changing by the hour and changing by the day. But I would say right now it looks less likely than likely that we're going to have hubs for all 18 teams. But as we've been hearing out of WA, and Seb, you've been following this story on morning radio as well, they look very unlikely to open their borders anytime soon. Their health minister said earlier in the week that even though they've had the 5th straight day of not having any new cases of COVID-19, they're going to worry about reopening their businesses before they start worrying about reopening borders. Now, Tredders, it sounds like the South Australian government are moving closer towards opening up their borders. If that happens, it leaves WA in a precarious position, Seb, because it means that Fremantle and West Coast will most likely have to set up in Victoria temporarily, play some away games, bank some home games to later in the year, and hopefully by that stage, Tredders, the borders are opened up.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I do think it's a bit of a joke because, let's face it, at best case scenario, we've still got players only in the last 24 hours going into quarantine, so that's 2 weeks. Then we're hearing it's 3 weeks of them being isolated in a training hub. We hear potentially in their home state, so you won't have to travel at that stage. That's bits and pieces I've heard. So then we're at 5 weeks. So I sit there and go, I think Western Australia will actually back down because they're effectively a week behind South Australia. Yesterday, South Australia had 13 days. Hopefully today is 14, so that makes it 2 weeks of no positive cases. I think once Western Australia get a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in advance, who knows in a month, if they haven't tested positive, make no mistake, there'll be pressure from above for them to open the borders, albeit in a quarantine state so football can continue. And you talk about getting business back. The biggest business in this comp, effectively this competition, AFL, is one of the biggest businesses we see in Australia. So it also offers the mental aspect for fans and people involved, financial output where a lot of people put onto JobKeeper or lost their jobs with cost cutting. I think common sense will prevail. I think, let's face it, you wouldn't want to be the Premier of Western Australia coming into an election soon. I'm not sure when their election is up, but if you've peed off both the Fremantle and West Coast supporters, you ain't getting votes, mate. So I think it's once it opens, be smart and be reasonable.
I'm with you, Tredders. And look, a little birdie tells me there's a fair bit of money out west from time to time. So if they needed one benefactor to chip in with a charter plane to get the clubs in and out of Victoria, I reckon they might find somebody who'd be able to do it. Sam, Matthew Nicks had a really interesting comment. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so I was doing a radio interview with Jared Healy and Matthew Nicks on Tuesday night, and I didn't. This one took me by surprise. I knew that clubs were still in the middle of actually bringing players back into their home state, which, personal opinion, I think is just far too late. But have a listen to Matthew Nicks on the predicament that he's now got for the next couple of weeks.
Our biggest issue now, Lee, is we've just got them back into Adelaide. We've got every player back here as of yesterday. They've gone into 14 days of isolation. So, all the work they've done now is not been undone, but we've now got a challenge to keep them fit for the next 14 days by ways of treadmills, depending on where they're living, access to areas they can get movement in, and gyms and gym equipment. So
there you have it. 17 of their 45, Tredders and Seb, have now got to spend the next 2 weeks in quarantine. Why did it take this long? There's got to be blame placed somewhere. Now, either they're not getting up-to-date advice from the AFL, and we know the AFL have got heaps on their plate at the moment, or the Crows, and I'm not sure what the Port Adelaide situation is, Tredders, but the club has just mismanaged this and been caught on the hop. They should have been bringing players back weeks ago. I mean, the only reason that players were granted access to be able to go back home was to see family, really. Now, once you'd spend a few weeks back home and you've made sure that mum and dad and the family is okay, then surely the clubs were getting them back sooner rather than later just to be ready.
Well, I think I'm actually going to defend both the Adelaide Crows in particular, and Matty Nix in this case, because I spoke to their rivals, Port Adelaide, someone off the record chat to say, hey, where are things going? How much info? They didn't have much information at all. And this is the bit that I know the AFL's got a lot to do with. They're trying to work out broadcasters, trying to deal with health authorities, governments. I guess the players that, once they've organised this pay deal, are probably pushed to a side. But I can tell you, Mitch Georgiadis, the young player who debuted from Western Australia, he only arrived back, and we were there at Channel 9 News in Adelaide, as he arrived back yesterday morning. So he's got 2 weeks in Travis Folke's house. There was talk there was actually going to be Tom Jonas' shack on the Murray River. But Folke's house, don't worry, is kitted up. But it's certainly not big enough as a footy ground to run around and train. And he's going to be there for 2 weeks in isolation. That says to me the information hasn't got through. I know the clubs have said to the players 2 weeks ago, start making your way back. But until you're actually told to come back, and the clubs are still waiting. And like we're all expecting, probably June long weekend, there's maybe this idea that the AFL is looking to return by then. That's still a long way away. So that says to me the clubs haven't had enough information. Probably the players have probably taken upon themselves to cruise back when they can. The other issue too is how do you get flights, because half the flights have been cancelled as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the cases, particularly in Victoria, was that next Monday we'll see a reduction of restrictions. It might take us a bit closer to the training in the groups of 10. That needs to happen for 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks of pre-season, which gets us to mid-June. But Sam, I wanted to ask two things. Firstly, a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but more on that later. But how about this? There seems to be a bit of Vic versus the rest going on at the moment. Out west, obviously, they've got their issues about playing home games or not. We heard Tommy Rockcliffe earlier say that he felt that AFL House was Vic slanted. Is the football world united at the moment, or is there some, for legitimate reasons, a bit of interstate tension?
Oh, there's definitely tension, but as Tredrea, I'm sure, would attest to, that there's often tension between states. But I think the Western Australian states were pretty perturbed when they were told that they couldn't train in groups of 10, given that when we go back to a season that is shortened, and playing more games in a shorter period of time, the interstate sides are going to be the ones that are hit hardest because they're going to be expected to travel to and from games in a shorter period of time. If, it's going to be very different for Collingwood than it is going to be for West Coast, who are going to have to get on a plane, travel 3 hours, set up, travel back 3 hours. I mean, you can understand that there's tension, but the AFL are trying to create an equal system for all involved. Unfortunately, there's no equality in the fixture because we don't play everyone once. So I can understand all sides. In fact, I'm surprised the tension didn't rise sooner.
There's always competitive tension, because the only thing I think the only players that we had form of tension a few weeks ago was the AFL versus its players. How are we going to get this pay deal? That was the only time they're united, because since then, now it's about competitive advantage. Western Australian teams, can they train in 10? No, they're not allowed to, even though their government says they can. But then, as you mentioned, they're going to be going and travelling even more. South Australia and Western Australia and Northern Territory are far way ahead of other situations. I just think it's a nightmare. I do think they raised some really good points. I heard Matty Lloyd on Footy Classified the other day. He said just control what you're going to control. I think that chat may come from a coach if it continues into the season. But our season hasn't started yet, realistically, after one round and, 6-week break. I think Travis Boak made a really good point. He was talking about 7 weeks heading into last year's finals Richmond played at the MCG. Well, if you talk about equal, I think that probably needs to change. But the facts are, you've got 10 teams based in Melbourne. You've got all the rest of the teams based into the state. The interstate teams have a more significant home ground advantage for the majority of the year because they play 11 home games. And realistically, Melbourne clubs share that 50-50 half the time.
I don't understand these non-Victorians, Sammy. They say they want to play at home all the time at the beautiful Adelaide Oval, and then they complain they don't get enough time at the MCG. There's only so many games in a year, Tredders.
Absolutely, and you've got to pull a crowd when you're interstate, and that's why you don't play at MCG, because how many Victorians are going to come and watch West Coast, Port Adelaide, Gold Coast, GWS? I agree with you there. So I think it's cake and eat it too. You can't have both of them, boys. You can't sit there and go, we're playing at Adelaide Oval, that absolutely one-eyed crowd, and the same in the West, and then you sit there and go, well, hang on, Richmond and Collingwood, why are they playing at the MCG? Well, they're both in Melbourne, and they fill out the joint.
Can I just get a yes or no answer from both of you? I don't want to turn into a big debate about this, but should the AFL Grand Final this year be hosted by the MCG or by the club that finishes higher, given that we're expected to play in front of no crowds? MCG or higher?
Higher.
MCG.
Higher, and only because it's locked away at the MCGs for 50 years, but no one's going to be there, boys.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
It's a terrible product when it is
Doesn't
empty.
matter. But it's not going to look any better at another empty stadium.
Yeah, Spotless Stadium will look pretty rubbish as well if GWS...
It's empty half the time anyway, isn't it?
I was going to say, GWS were practising social distancing before it was law. It's been going on there for years at the Sydney Showgrounds.
I'm not supporting this. I'm a big GWS fan.
Well, that's some fun.
I think we are. Hey, look, this isn't fun, and we're not going to spend too much time on this, but Dean Laidley, the Premiership player of North Melbourne, the former coach, was arrested Saturday night. He remains in custody. Tredders, he sort of passed through Port during your last season, I think, as an assistant coach. What did you make when you saw the headlines coming through?
Oh, it was sad. Like, everyone has seen it, and you don't have to be immune to what has gone around in social media or via text message. It's sad, that aspect too. Realistically, this person's is troubled and got some issues at the moment, and not one person in life and football wishes ill of him. So we certainly hope that things come out for the positive once the court process and everything takes its run. But my instances of working with Dean, I was really excited when it was after he left North Melbourne, joined Port Adelaide in an assistant role. It was in my last year. He was a super smart footy person. He was super intense. And I thought, he's a really good person to be around. So it's a shame to see where he is right now.
Well said. I think just the one thing I would add to that, and I don't know where Dean's head is at the moment, but I've had a few calls during the week about civil action that will come as a result of a photo of Dean in custody being leaked. It's my information that if he did pursue that civil action, which he's likely to do, the payout from Victoria Police will be enormous. It'll basically be a blank cheque situation because there's no way that the police would want this to play out in an open court. So, as it should do. But that was just a bit of late mail coming through today. Guys, let's move on to something that's a bit more of a talking point, and that is an idea thrown up by a colleague of ours in the media, Andy Marr, that like a father-son scenario, you should be able to, as a club, take a brother. That is, if you've got one brother on the list and he's got a little brother, you can have first crack at him, or at least have an advantaged crack at him. Sam, would that work?
I haven't thought about it too deeply. I do like when Andy comes up with these left field ideas. And he's a good Carlton man, Andy. And just thinking off the top of my head, they do have a couple of brothers there. They've got the Curnow brothers.
They do.
His brother Charlie. Then Jack got his younger brother Ben Silvani, and they might have another one coming through this year if the draft takes place. It's not something I've spent a whole heap thinking about. Tredders?
No, I don't think so. But I think what we need to do is fix the father-son rule, because I don't think the father-son rule or daughter rule works that well at the moment. Because at the moment, for example, if he's a first-round pick and he's worth 2,000 points, you get a discount of 20% if the club gets him. Other clubs can then nominate to try and pinch him earlier. Why don't we bring back a little bit of family feeling and club feeling and just let clubs list players? So imagine that Gary Ablett Jr. never got to play at Geelong. Matthew Scarlett never got to play at Geelong. Tom Hawkins, Brett Ebert never got to play at Port Adelaide. You can go, the Silvani brothers you just mentioned never got to play at Carlton. Why don't you be in a situation where, as we know, there's less boys born compared to girls? So we just take AFL in this instance and we put aside to the AFLW on this discussion. But so you're less chance of actually having a father-son, right, in the first place, because more girls are born every year. Then you go, well, if you like, one of my sons is desperate to play footy. The other one's got no interest in football whatsoever. And then you've got to be the best in around about 100 to be listed anyway. Why do we have to jump through so many hurdles when you could just go, you know what, this kid's a gun. He gets to play for his dad's club and they get to list him straight up. At least there's a little bit of feeling, because everything is so even and regimented in the AFL. Why wouldn't you just have this one out to say that this is a little bit of family nostalgia? You can sit back and go, yep, Serge played, Sauce played, and then all of a sudden his kids are now playing. And then the next one doesn't even have to be listed. He could just be a Carlton person, because I guarantee he would have supported Carlton in the first place anyway.
Very, very interesting. I like that, Tredders. Now, we've got a musical number coming up on Talk of the Town, but first, I just want to throw this at you, Sam. I have obviously had a little bit to do in the political world. I've seen some of the most incredible message managers. Well, some
you were born in there.
Oh, that's true. Some incredible managers of the message. That's right. In the change rooms, exactly. Running around getting Christopher Pine's autograph. No, I've seen some amazing. Oh no, tell me about it. I've seen some amazing managers of the message, but the AFL, I think, do it better than anyone in the country, better than government, better than corporate Australia. And I'm just wondering, is it possible that the Hub's proposal that we've spent weeks talking about was never actually going to happen? And the plan was to condition us to expect it. So when the season started and the Hubs weren't necessary, we all felt, wow, what an amazing job the league has done at managing this season.
Great minds think alike, Seb, because I think the great Lee Matthews was on a similar kind of theme last night. Now, that's taking the theory to the nth degree. But I do think that there is an element of if we have a case of worst case scenario, and we set that up knowing that whatever happens, if COVID spreads again or we have a second wave, we will be able to get the season done. If we put that to them, we'll look okay, but geez, it'll be full on. Anything that happens better than that makes the AFL look great, I think, and it put a little bit of pressure on the Players Association. So there's one thing that we know Gillon McLachlan and his AFL executive are good at, and that is the optics of not only the game, but of a situation. So, I think you're onto something. I just think the AFL have played it beautifully again. Well
said, Sammy. Did you hear that, Treaders? Me and Lee Matthews just being compared to each other?
Yep, absolutely. Won a lot of hard balls, you two.
All right, time for that musical number, I promised. And this is the great Melbourne comedian, Marty Fields, ripper bloke. And like all of us, I think Marty's got a bit of spare time on his hands, but he's put it to good use with a reworking of a Mike Brady classic.
Well, there's a lot of things to football that I must admit I miss. I miss $14 bourbons. I miss queuing up to piss. I miss seats that have no leg room. I miss $20 to park. I miss our $1 million forward missing another mark. But the virus the football. The game's been locked away. They played round one in a ghost town when no one watched them play. Yeah, the virus the football. It's done the game no good. I'd give anything to watch a game. Even Collingwood. Even Collingwood.
Very nice work, Marty Fields, bringing a sense of variety to Talk of the Town. Sam, anything you missed from football? Marty had a list there.
Yeah, I miss a lot of things, Seb, but I try to walk to games when I can, or park the car a couple of kilometres away and walk in, headphones in, listening to the pre-game, and then when you get about 500 metres away, the headphones come out and you just start taking in the atmosphere, and that waft of hot chips.
Oh, yes.
A little bit of sauce. Don't you shake your head, Treaders. I know you love it.
Oh, no, but the inner fatty in me's just going agreeing with you. Who doesn't like hot chips? Boys, I'll take you one further. The thing I miss most, not sarcasm here, is the bloke screaming record while you're trying to do a news cross just before the match starts. No one likes the bloke record. You know, I've never bought one just because he screams at you. You bought one because you want one. No need to scream, mate. Please, when we come back to footy, that's right, there's going to be no one there to sell records for.
We're getting a bit of it. You had people running up to giving you records. That's why you never bought one.
Yes. I thought you were going to say I just spent my time setting records, Treaders.
Oh, I was going to use that, but you sound
Look, it is always good catching up with the Talk of the Town team, the Port Adelaide Premiership champion, Warren Tredrea. Thanks for your time.
I can smell it. Smell the mud, boys. We're nearly back.
See you next week, Sammy McClure.
Thanks, boys.
Thanks for watching Talk of the Town.